10:19 p.m. Friday, May 20th, 2005. A cell phone lights up in the dark. Ray McAdams flips it open and reads a message from his ex-fiance, Brandy Hanna. It's short, simple, and completely ordinary. It says, "I'm going to Myrtle Beach for the weekend." To the police, this was an open and shut case. A 32-year-old woman took a spontaneous trip to the coast to clear her head. Case closed. But when Brandy's mother, Donna, heard about that text, her blood ran cold. Because she knew the one thing the police didn't. Brandy didn't own a car. She didn't even have a driver's license. She had $0 in her bank account and hadn't packed a single bag. Brandy Hanna physically could not have driven herself to the beach. That text message wasn't a travel plan. It was a lie. By the time Donna unlocked Brandy's apartment door on Monday morning, the silence inside was heavy. It wasn't the silence of an empty house, it was the silence of a tomb. The TV was off, the lights were out, but the air conditioning was blasting, freezing the room. And sitting right there on the coffee table was a cup of tea, half finished, cold. Donna walked to the kitchen and froze. The window was cracked open, just a few inches. Now, you have to understand where Brandy lived. The Shikara Cherokee neighborhood of North Charleston was a war zone. Drugs, violence, theft. Brandy was terrified of the streets outside her door. She kept her blinds drawn and her locks tight. She never opened her windows. But on this night, she did. The tea on the table tells us she wasn't dragged out screaming. You don't brew tea for an intruder. You brew tea for a guest. And the open window tells us she wasn't hiding from the person outside. She was letting them in. Someone was in that room with her. Someone she knew well enough to sit down with. Someone she trusted enough to unlock the only barrier between her and the dark. And that person is the only one who knows who actually sent that text. To understand why Brandy unlocked that window, you have to understand the two men pulling her apart. This wasn't just a love triangle, it was a war between safety and danger. On one side, you had the safe cage. His name was Ray McAdams. Ray was everything a mother wants for her daughter. He was older, he was wealthy, and he offered Brandy a life of stability. They spent 6 years together, 6 years of dinners, holidays, and promises. But by the spring of 2005, Brandy felt like she was suffocating. The spark had died, and the stability had turned into a rut. So she left. But Ray didn't accept the breakup. To him, Brandy wasn't just a girlfriend, she was a possession he was losing. He began a campaign of obsession. He called her constantly, sometimes 10, 20 times a day. He would show up unannounced at her job, begging her to come home. He was the guy who wouldn't let go. And in the eyes of the law, the jilted ex is always the first suspect. But Brandy didn't leave Ray to be alone. She left him for the dangerous freedom. Enter Garland Eugene Lankford. Everyone called him Zeke. Zeke was the anti-Ray. He was rough, he had a criminal record, he was exciting. Brandy fell for him hard, believing she could fix him. She was so committed to this new life that she moved out of Ray's safe suburban home and followed Zeke to an apartment on Florida Avenue in the Shikara Cherokee neighborhood. If you know North Charleston, you know you don't move to Shikara Cherokee unless you have to. It was a place where you didn't walk outside at night. And then, the betrayal happened. Almost as soon as Brandy signed the lease, Zeke bailed. He didn't just leave her, he went back to his wife, Diane. Let that sink in. Brandy blew up her safe life for a man who abandoned her in a high-crime neighborhood within weeks. She was left alone in that ground-floor apartment, surrounded by violence she wasn't built to handle. But she couldn't quit him. Even after he went back to his wife, Zeke kept coming around. He was the addiction she couldn't kick. By May 2005, Brandy was cornered. Ray was trying to buy her back, promising to take care of her. Zeke was using her, coming and going as he pleased, keeping her on a string. The pressure was breaking her. At her job at Alec's restaurant, where she worked alongside her mother, the regulars noticed a change. Brandy wasn't smiling. She was jumpy. She was constantly looking out the front window, watching the cars in the parking lot. On the very day she vanished, she leaned over a table to a regular customer. She didn't talk about the weather. She didn't talk about the menu. Her voice was trembling. She said, "I am frightened of someone." She didn't say a name. She didn't say if it was the ex-fiance who wouldn't stop calling or the criminal boyfriend who had dragged her into the dark. But by the time the sun went down that Friday, that fear would walk right through her front door. To understand the danger of that Friday night, you have to understand the geography of Florida Avenue. In 2005, the Shakora Cherokee neighborhood wasn't just rough. It was statistically the most dangerous square mile in the area. It was a place of broken streetlights, peeling paint, and a summer humidity that stuck to your skin like glue. Brandy had traded Ray's suburban fortress for a ground-floor apartment here. It was a tactical error. She didn't own a car. In the suburbs, that's an inconvenience. On Florida Avenue, it's a trap. Without a vehicle, Brandy was a sitting duck. She couldn't just drive away if things got bad. She was tethered to that apartment, reliant on others to move her through the world. And on May 20th, the walls were closing in. Back at Alex's restaurant, the shift had started normally, but the tension arrived with a phone call. Around mid-shift, the restaurant landline rang. Brandy answered. Witnesses say she went pale. She hung up the phone, physically shaking. When a regular customer asked her what was wrong, Brandy didn't brush it off. She leaned in, terrified, and whispered 5 words that still haunt this case. "I am frightened of someone." She didn't say who. She wiped down the table and went back to work. But when she clocked out at 3 p.m., she didn't have a getaway car. She had to bum a ride home. The moment that car dropped her off and drove away, leaving her on the curb of Florida Avenue, she was isolated. 5:50 p.m., the last contact. Brandy calls her mother, Donna. They talk about work. The conversation is mundane, but outside, the sun is starting to go down. The shadows are getting long. It was a hot South Carolina night, the kind where the air is thick and heavy. This is where the timeline breaks. We know Brandy lived like a prisoner. She kept her blinds drawn tight. She kept her doors double locked. She never opened her windows. She was hiding from the world outside. So why, on this specific night, did she break her own rule? At 10:30 p.m., a friend pulled up to the apartment for a planned shopping trip. The building was pitch black. The friend walked up the path and knocked. Knock, knock. Silence. The only sound was the mechanical roar of the window air conditioning unit running full blast. The friend stood there on the porch, listening. She assumed Brandy had fallen asleep early. She turned around, got back in her car, and drove away. She had no idea that on the other side of that wall, just a few feet away, a cup of tea was sitting on the table. It was likely still warm. Brandy wasn't sleeping. She was already gone. If that friend had turned the doorknob, would she have found it unlocked? Would she have walked in on a crime in progress? Or had Brandy already been let out into the dark, leaving the AC humming behind her? When a woman vanishes without a trace, the investigation usually starts and ends with the men in her life. In Brandy Hanna's case, detectives had 2 perfect villains. First, they looked at Ray McAdams, the obsessed ex. Ray's behavior on the weekend Brandy disappeared was practically a checklist of guilt. On the very night she vanished, Ray abruptly left town. He drove to his parents' house in a different city. But it wasn't just the trip that raised red flags. It was the silence. Ray McAdams, the man who called Brandy 10 times a day, the man who was so desperate to hear her voice that he harassed her at work, turned his cell phone off for 2 straight days. When police executed a search warrant on his home, what they found unsettled even the most veteran detectives. It wasn't a weapon, it was a room dedicated entirely to Brandy. Walls covered in her photographs, mementos from their relationship preserved like artifacts in a museum. It was a shrine built by a man who refused to let go. To the police, This screamed motive. If Ray couldn't have her, he made sure no one else could. But Ray had a shield, the text message. He argued, why would I kill her and then fake a text saying she was going to the beach? Why would I create an alibi that puts her with another man? The logic was twisted, but it held. If Ray wanted to cover his tracks, he would have sent a text saying, I'm going back to Ray. Instead, the text pointed away from him. So the spotlight swung to suspect number 2, Garland Zeke Langford. If Ray was the crime of passion suspect, Zeke was the cold-blooded suspect. When detectives brought Zeke in, he was calm. He had a simple story. He said he was working. He told investigators he was on a job site until late that Friday night and went straight home to his wife. He claimed he never saw Brandy, never spoke to Brandy, and was nowhere near Florida Avenue. It was a solid alibi, until detectives pulled the records. They subpoenaed the time cards from Zeke's employer, and there, stamped in black ink, was the lie that cracked the case wide open. Zeke didn't work late. He clocked out at 4 p.m. For the exact window of time that Brandy vanished, from her last phone call at 5:50 p.m. to the phantom knock at 10:30 p.m., Zeke Langford was a ghost. He was off the clock, unaccounted for, and free to do whatever he wanted. When confronted with the timesheet, Zeke's arrogance crumbled. The man who swore he was working suddenly remembered something else. He shifted in his chair. He looked at the detectives and changed his story. Okay, he admitted, maybe I went to her apartment. He admitted he might have stopped by that night. He might have seen her. This was the turning point. The alibi was dead. The police now knew that Zeke Langford lied about his whereabouts during the critical hours of the disappearance. And if he lied about being at work, what else was he lying about? Did he walk through that door? Did he sit down for a cup of tea? And when he walked out, did he leave alone? To find the truth, we have to stop looking at the suspects and start looking at the room itself. The apartment on Florida Avenue tells a story that the text messages tried to hide. It starts with a contradiction in physics. When police entered the scene, the air conditioning unit was running full blast. It was a hot, humid South Carolina night, and the machine was fighting to keep the room cool. But just a few feet away, the kitchen window was cracked open 3 inches. Thermodynamically, this makes no sense. The open window creates a vacuum, sucking the expensive cold air right out into the night. Brandy, who was struggling with money, would never waste electricity like that. So, why open it? One theory is that she was smoking, but investigators found no cigarette butt, no ash. The darker theory is that the window wasn't opened for air. It was opened for communication. Imagine the scene. The AC is too loud to hear a knock. Someone stands outside in the flower bed and taps on the glass. Brandy walks over, slides it up, and talks through the screen. She knows this person. She feels safe enough to unlock the barrier, but not safe enough to step outside. Or did she invite them in? That leads us to the most heartbreaking piece of evidence, the tea. Sitting on the coffee table was a mug of tea, half consumed. In the world of forensic profiling, a half-drunk cup of tea implies leisure. It implies a pause. If an intruder kicks down your door, you drop the cup, it shatters. If you are grabbed immediately, you don't have time to brew it. Brandy made that tea. She set it on a coaster. She drank half of it. This tells us that for a significant amount of time that Friday night, she was sitting in her living room, comfortable. She wasn't alone. You make tea when you have a guest. You make tea when you are settling in for a conversation. Was Zeke that guest? Did he talk his way through the door? Did they sit there, the air conditioner humming, the tea getting cold, while he convinced her to leave with him? But the streets of Chicora, Cherokee whispered a different story, a story that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with debt. As the investigation stalled, rumors bubbled up from the local underground. Zeke Langford wasn't just a bad boyfriend, he was allegedly deep into the local drug trade. And in that world, debts are sometimes paid with currency that isn't cash. A terrifying theory emerged. Was Brandy the payment? Did Zeke owe money to the wrong people? Did he open that door not to reconcile, but to deliver her to someone else? This aligns with the human trafficking angle that investigators have quietly explored for years. And then there is the wild card, the wife. Zeke went back to his wife, Diane. We know Brandy was receiving terrifying phone calls at work. We know she told a customer, "I am frightened of someone." Was she afraid of a drug dealer? Or was she afraid of a scorned wife who wanted the mistress gone? The apartment gives us no answers, only silence. The tea sits there, the window stays open, and the only witnesses are the ghosts of the people who walked out that door and never came back. Justice in the case of Brandy Hanna did not come with a bang. It came with a whisper, 11 years too late. In December 2016, police finally moved on Garland Zeke Langford. They arrested him, but not for murder. Without a body, without a murder weapon, and without a confession, the district attorney couldn't charge him with taking Brandy's life. Instead, they charged him with lying about it. Zeke was indicted for obstruction of justice. The state proved that his 2005 alibi, the claim that he was working late, was a fabrication. They proved he lied to investigators when he said he never saw her that night. In court, the man who once abandoned Brandy in a war zone now stood accused of erasing her from the map. He eventually entered a plea. He served a short prison sentence, and today, Garland Langford is a free man. He walked out of his cell, back into the world, while Brandy remains somewhere in the dark. As for the other man in this tragedy, Ray McAdams, his watch has ended. Ray died of a heart attack years after Brandy vanished. Until his final breath, he maintained his innocence. He died in that house, still surrounded by the shrine he built for her, a room full of photos of a woman who left him to find freedom, only to find a trap. And that leaves Donna. Brandy's mother still waits. She still hopes. Every time a body is found in the marshlands of South Carolina, she waits for the phone to ring. Looking back, the entire case hinges on those glowing blue pixels from 10:19 p.m. "I'm going to Myrtle Beach." For years, that text message baffled investigators. It was a physical impossibility. Brandy had no car, no money, and no way to get to the coast. But when you stop looking at it as a travel plan and start looking at it as a strategy, the horror sets in. That text message wasn't sent to tell Ray where she was going. It was sent to buy time. Whoever sent that message knew that if people thought Brandy was on a weekend getaway, no one would look for her on Saturday, no one would look for her on Sunday. That text message was a digital breadcrumb thrown by a killer to buy himself a 48-hour head start, and it worked. By the time Donna unlocked that door on Monday morning, the tea was cold, the timeline was broken, and Brandy Hanna was gone. This case remains one of South Carolina's most frustrating mysteries because the evidence pulls us in two different directions. On one hand, you have the obsessed ex theory, Ray McAdams, who built a shrine to a woman he couldn't let go of. On the other, you have the dangerous boyfriend, Zeke Langford, whose alibi was proven to be a lie. But the truth might be sitting right on that coffee table. I want to know what you think happened in that apartment. Do you believe Brandy opened that window to let Zeke in? Or do you believe the Myrtle Beach text was a sign that she left with someone else entirely? Let me know your theory in the comments below. And if you believe Brandy Hanna deserves to be found, please like this video and share her story. The more people who see her face, the harder it is for her secrets to stay buried.